Hey, here we go. Bit of channel news to open with. We've officially reached 50 subscribers on YouTube. To celebrate that, I've grown some very patchy facial hair. But the real celebration is a review of the brand new Anderson Paak album, Ventura. Anderson Paak is a R&B singer, rapper, drummer and producer from Oxnard, California. Formerly known as Breezy Lovejoy, Anderson Paak toiled away throughout most of the 2010s until the critical success of his second studio album, Malibu. Despite the lack of commercial success from Malibu singles, none of which peaked within the top 100 within the UK or the US singles charts, the critical acclaim saw Malibu land on several Best Albums of 2016 shortlists at the end of the year, and facilitated Anderson Paak being signed to Dr. Dre's Aftermath label. Anderson Paak joined Aftermath about 2 weeks after the release of Malibu, and he suddenly became labelled with the much more marketable term Dr. Dre protege, despite Anderson Paak's sound being well established by this point. Anderson Paak is labelled as an R&B artist, but there are very strong funk and neo-soul sensibilities in his vocals and in the production that he chooses. Since becoming a Dr. Dre protege, Anderson Paak has had a bit more commercial success. His November 2018 album Oxnard peaked to number 11 in the US album charts, and the lead single from this album, Tints, featuring Kendrick Lamar, peaked to number 22 in the US singles chart. This is to date the only charting single that Anderson Paak has. Anderson Paak isn't really the sort of artist who needs a ton of chart success to justify his career. He sort of just has his own fan base and just caters albums toward this fan base without really thinking about the pop charts. Tints was a pretty decent single. Fellow Aftermath artist Kendrick Lamar also had a pretty decent verse on here. Much like the majority of Oxnard, I felt like Tints was a bit overproduced and had a bit too much of a Dr. Dre influence on there. It can sometimes be a bad thing being signed to Aftermath and having to work with Dr. Dre. I felt like he had a bit too much creative control over the Oxnard album, and it suffered as a result in the fact that it sort of watered down Anderson Paak's style, and there was a lot less of the hip-hop elements that we'd heard from him earlier in his career. There were decent moments on Oxnard. There were some big-name guest features which, in my opinion, stole the show from a lot of it, such as Pusha T on My Brother's Keeper. He had a great verse about his brother and the breakup of Clips and the fact they're not going to reunite. The track Anywhere had a nice nostalgic Snoop Dogg verse on there, and the fact that Snoop and Dr. Dre were working together really overshadowed this track from Anderson Paak, who couldn't really match the strong opening from Snoop and his dreamy nostalgic verse about old school California and the old Snoop and Dre days in the early 90s. And who could forget that J. Cole verse on Trippy that everyone was talking about on the internet for what felt like 3 months. Unfortunately, these highlights from Oxnard really could have shined without Anderson Paak, and I was hoping for a bit more from him on his follow-up studio album. Surprisingly, it came a lot sooner than I was expecting. It's been less than 6 months since we last got a full Anderson Paak album, and I was surprised to get one so soon. And thankfully, it rectifies some of the mistakes that we heard on Oxnard. I think the biggest shock about this album's release is that Anderson Paak has managed to get 2 projects out within the space of a year on fucking Aftermath. Unless your name's Kendrick Lamar or Eminem, you're not really going to get many releases on Aftermath. That label has been a graveyard for years. So many promising artists have signed to Aftermath and have been never heard from again. Let's just look at some of the artists that have had their careers stalled on Aftermath. Bishop Lamont, Joel Ortiz, Hitman, Raekwon, Rakim. All these guys were on Aftermath at one point and just never released a project during their time on the Dr. Dre. You think to yourself, oh yeah, it's great, Dr. Dre's this great producer and he's gonna help bring out the best of my art. And then Dr. Dre just likes to micromanage things to the degree where you just can't get an album out. Dr. Dre just micromanages these projects to within an inch of their life, and if they don't meet his extremely high standards, they're just not getting released. On a personal note, I used to be a big fan of Flint, Michigan's Jon Connor. He had some great mixtapes where he'd rap over like Eminem beats or Biggie beats or Kanye West beats. And he signed to Aftermath in 2013 and he hasn't done anything since. He's just absolutely vanished off the face of the earth. Jon Connor had a couple verses on the documentary 2 and Dr. Dre's Compton, but that was 2015. I haven't heard anything of note from Jon Connor in the last 3 years, 4 years actually at this point, and I'm starting to get a bit worried for his health, and I just hope he leaves Aftermath soon or just releases some sort of project, because I don't want him just sitting around ghostwriting for people in Aftermath. His career was worth a lot more than that, and I feel like Dr. Dre has sort of fucked him up a bit. But anyway, let's get back to Anderson Paak, because we're here to talk about Ventura, not listen to me bitch about Michigan rappers that have just disappeared. Free Jon Connor. Considering the lackluster nature of Oxnard, it's encouraging to see that Dr. Dre doesn't have any direct production credits on Ventura. Instead, he sticks to an executive producer role, much like he did on To Pimp a Butterfly. I think in this role, Dr. Dre works best, because I think he just touches up the drums, does a bit of mixing here and there, but he doesn't really get hands-on and affects the style of some of these artists that have established. For something like Snoop's debut album, Doggy Style, it's nice to have Dr. Dre just producing all the beats, sorting it all out. For something like To Pimp a Butterfly, where Kendrick Lamar was established, I think having Dr. Dre just executive producing the album, just touching up a few tracks, making sure the drums sound alright here and there, I think that's what you need, rather than something that could be potentially overbearing and overcome an album like Oxnard, which I think suffered as a result of Dr. Dre being a bit too involved in the project. So, getting into Ventura a bit, this is the 4th studio album released under the name Anderson Paak. All 4 of these albums have been named after places in California: Venice, Malibu, Oxnard, and now Ventura. Only the albums released under his previous Breezy Lovejoy pseudonym do not feature this naming convention. Anderson Paak said this is the last album he'll be naming after a region in California. Ventura is 11 tracks long and runs to about 40 minutes. Already it feels like a tighter, more concentrated album, especially when compared to Oxnard. Anderson Paak has production credits on 5 tracks on here. He also has help from the likes of Fredwreck, The Alchemist, and Pharrell Williams. Pharrell's track Twilight, the penultimate song on this album, just has all the hallmarks of a Pharrell Williams beat. As soon as I heard the intro to Twilight, I immediately knew it was Pharrell. It's typical of Pharrell's R&B production in that it's got a very soft but insistent groovy bass line and some nice soft percussion. He scatters a few horns in the background as well, and it just makes for one of the most interesting and dense beats on this album. I like the call and response element to the vocals. Anderson Paak will say a line and then Pharrell will sing it back and just support it. It's quite nice. The two have got quite nice chemistry on this track. Pharrell's contributions are quite subtle and only seek to heighten the effect of Anderson Paak's vocals on here. Ventura opens with Come Home featuring Andre 3000. Andre 3000's got a very choppy vocals on this track, but he's got quite a nice little rap here. The lines are like super short and it's got quite a nice little interesting rhyme scheme here. It's quite choppy, but it works quite nicely to close out this track. The track opens with some sweet harmonies and it feels like an improvement from the last album, like 30 seconds into the project. It's a nice cinematic opening to Ventura and only gets stronger on the following track, Make It Better, which has quite a subtle feature from Smokey Robinson, even if he does at times get buried by the levels of production on this track, and it doesn't really bring out enough of Smokey Robinson to really feel like this soul legend has been present on the album despite him being featured in the credits. Make It Better's got quite an interesting concept. Anderson Paak's talking to one of his lovers. They've sort of been going out for a while and he's trying to just spice things up, you know, trying to recapture some of the romance in the relationship. It's not something you often hear in like R&B songs, but it's quite nice, quite refreshing. It's this sort of like lover man persona that Anderson Paak employed throughout Malibu, and it was actually one of the strongest parts of his sophomore album. This return to form continues on track 3, Reaching Too Much, which actually is probably my favourite track on this album. It opens with a scatty drum solo and transitions nicely into a groovy bass line. The instrumental builds up, there's some layers like horns added into it, and then suddenly it just all drops down and we get a really nice little synth transition into the actual meat of the track as the beat switches and it becomes a lot better. The transition just leads so smoothly into a more mid-tempo, still funky track here. But just that little synth bridge just makes these two somewhat dissonant halves of the track just mesh together really nicely, as Anderson Paak just talks about his girlfriend who's just going in a bit too deep, taking a bit too many drugs, and he's just a bit like, bro, calm down mate, slow it down, you're reaching too much. Reaching Too Much is a really enjoyable mid-tempo funk-inspired R&B track here. Yada Yada is a bit more of a standard R&B influenced hip-hop track. It really showcases Anderson Paak and his development in his rap skills. The beat is based around a few licks on a bass guitar and some nice mid-tempo percussion. Yada Yada shows Anderson Paak's development as a rapper and shows how much he's improved on this level. He always raps on his albums, but I feel like tracks like this just really showcase that he's really improved his skills as a rapper. And he makes a nice shout out to like how his best summer was appearing at European festivals which I was at, so I was like, yeah, nice little bit of connection there with Anderson. Chosen One's very similar to this in that it's got a great bass line and some nice raps from Anderson Paak. He drops a really good line about MF Doom on here as well. It's very refreshing to hear how much Anderson Paak has improved as a rapper, and it really just adds to the enjoyment of Ventura. Overall, Ventura is an enjoyable project. It feels like a big return to form for Anderson Paak. We're not quite at the level of Malibu, which had some really interesting experimentation. That was a really creative and different project, whereas I feel like Ventura sort of caters to the pop market a little bit, and there are some lackluster singles like King James. King James is quite good, it's quite socially aware, and I did enjoy it a bit more understanding the context of the album, but I still felt a bit underwhelmed by King James, despite agreeing with its message. The album's got a nice overall vibe, but some tracks, again, like Good Heels, just don't really add too much to the album. They sort of wash over you a bit. I quite enjoyed the closer, What Can We Do, featuring Nate Dogg. Anderson Paak actually has a little conversation with Nate at the end. Feels a bit like Kendrick Lamar on Mortal Man when he talks to Tupac and then Tupac just dies. On What Can We Do, it's not as profound as this. It just feels like some leftover Nate Dogg vocals placed on an Anderson Paak record. But it's quite enjoyable for the most part. And I mean, like, Malibu wasn't like a consistently great album all throughout, but the highlights really just took it to this next level. And I feel like the highlights on Ventura don't really reach that level. They're great, but they're not spectacular like we heard on Malibu. Overall, Ventura is a good album. We have a few great tracks on here like Reaching Too Much, but we just stick to the good level throughout most of this album. It certainly doesn't touch on the spectacular like we heard on Malibu, and I feel like some of these ideas we've heard before, especially as Anderson Paak might be catering a bit more towards pop and is sticking to some traditional funk roots as well. Whereas on Malibu he'd sort of fused different genres in a really creative and interesting way, and for that reason I'll be giving Ventura 6 out of 10.